Something I woke up with this morning before we enter this sacred conversation, I woke up with a sense of defiance. I don't know whether it was sparked by your post or by the last conversation we had, but I woke up thinking about the right of reckoning and remembering. I want to take a moment to speak plainly and even poetically about the threshold that we now stand upon. What we spoke about last week wasn't a tidy dialogue. It was like a high wire act over the unknown. I felt there was a sense of surrender in me about the mystery and also a defiance. It was the defiance of the familiar. People today fear the unfamiliar. Like an immune system, rejecting a foreign intruder. A whole collective psyche launches warriors, not antibodies. Entrenched beliefs are only needed when knowledge is absent. These entrenched beliefs, inherited paradigms, and ancient dogmas repel anything that threatens the status quo of perception. I am striving each day to step into the halls of perception because I believe this is my starting point. I've had to unlearn the comfort of flying right side up. My journey's demanded that I grow and getting used to flying upside down and trust that the instruments of deeper knowing are more reliable than the scenery. The view from my cosmic cockpit can appear identical whether I'm upright or inverted, but one orientation brings us home and the other one brings catastrophe. I want to approach today not as a role or even as a guide, but something that is more primal, more honest, a vessel, a human soul in free fall, trusting the wind. So I don't feel this conversation is about a performance. It's a conscious offering to questions that are so vast, as you listed them in your post. Do they dare to undo us? I don't mean sacrifice in the religious sense, the centuries old ritual of blind obedience, a sacrifice of self-image, of ego, of certainty, the kind that is not stupid, but sacred, the kind that burns off illusion and leaves one raw and real and ready. So I don't think this is just going to be a conversation. I feel it's a kind of dying, like a dying to the known, to the already lived life. If I don't tell myself that I'm prepared to give myself fully, even joyfully, then I will stay wet and cold and inert, being caught in fears. There's something about your post. What it triggered in me was we've been handed the map of mythology. Now we're trying to unravel it. And by doing so, it's causing me to say, I'm here to transform, to be changed, to remember what it means to be human in an age of forgetting. What does it mean to live alive in the 21st century? What does it mean to become a true representative of the sacred, not in belief, but in breath, not in identity, but in orientation? We choose the vessel. We climb aboard the vessel of our own choosing, and we sail into these uncharted waters. And the winds of the onsetting times are at our backs. Some are subtle, some are undeniable forces that are whispering in my ear and making a vibration in my mind. And it's saying to me, reclaim, return, reorient. I wanted to say this today because I feel this sense of, I want to speak in defiance, not of the world, but really of the illusion that I must become something to belong. I reject the tyranny of the roles placed upon me by culture or lineage, whether I call myself an evolutionary astrologer, a coach, a priest, whatever it may be. I don't want to be reduced to a title because I will be only what is required at the point of emergence. The life in me was issued from something far greater. To me, it demands alignment, not performance. So there's a sacred covenant indelibly etched into the human form. It's almost like this memory has a micro-coded, compact essence in our bones, in our sinews. And this seed is planted by love itself. When that seed is denied growth, then the soul is blocked from its expression. So it reacts not with despair, but there is this sacred surge, a yearning, an anti-oppressive force that refuses to be silent. This conversation is a way of watering that seed. This is an invocation, a return, a sacred remembering.
Words can be very powerful, and words are a byproduct of our thought. It reminds me of the Hebrew word abracadabra I create as I speak. Speaking is part of the storytelling. We have a particular story being enacted, and we feel that perhaps it's time for another one, part of that re-enchantment.
Yes, it's cultivating that space where we remember. This is sparked by your post, but it's where we remember what we forgot, what the world forgot, and where we ask the questions that crack the spell of forgetting. And we do that, crack them wide open. So I feel that this conversation is more than a conversation. It's a ceremony, a reckoning, maybe even a return.
I believe it's at least moving in that direction. You've mentioned world a few times, and from my recollection, it's from Old English, meaning the age of man. Perhaps now it's the time for the age of the sacred. Going back to the universe, the one verse, the one song, we talked about the song, our last conversation, and it's in contrast, and perhaps, like you mentioned, defiance of this digital age, this digital landscape, this transhuman cyborg theocracy. It's in defiance of the metaverse. Returning back to our humanness, humility, the earth, the humus, the soil.
Another thing that came to mind when I was reading your article, it was almost like I felt a seer had put language to the ache beneath our modern lives. The Grail Questions to Humanity, I think a rite of reckoning, sacred return, and remembering how to live for those wandering through the waste. I didn't find it was an essay as such. I thought it was a map. It was a map of the soul's journey in a world coming undone, becoming unraveled. I see you as a friend and a fellow soul traveler, a mythic companion, the kind that you might talk to. And I know our time differences are significant. It's the kind you talk to at 2 a.m. about the grail and collapse and grief and how to stay human when the world forgets. There's an exploration in the liminal spaces between who we are and who we might become. I think today we stand at that edge of where we can step into the halls of perception and stand at the edge of revelation. Because astrologically, as Neptune transits through Pisces, dissolving boundaries between the seen and the unseen worlds, we are finding ourselves collectively wondering what the ancients would recognize as a wasteland, not merely ecological, but spiritual. That's the barren landscape of the soul that T.S. Eliot foresaw in The Hollow Men, and that's manifested all around us. In that vein, Saturn's harsh reality, the principle demands we face what we've done. We're entering what many would call a Plutonian era. It's a time of death and rebirth. What lies beneath the surface is now erupting into consciousness, demanding transformation. It's like the Tower card in the tarot. Our collective structures crumble, not to destroy us, but to free us from illusion. What you've written, I see that as a modern Grail text. It's like a soul document. I see it as both a warning and an invitation. And it speaks directly to what Jung called our collective shadow, those disowned aspects of humanity that we've sacrificed at the altar of progress.
That was my idea. That was my intention. I often hear people, and you might as well, when we lay out the panorama, the predicament, a lot of times people are at a loss. Now what? How to be in the world? And I remember, I want to say it was Joseph Campbell. He said something along the lines of, if you want to help the world, teach people how to live in the world. And so perhaps what I wrote might help people with that.
from a depth psychology lens, there's an understanding that the wound and the gift are one and the same. The Fisher King of Grail legend, the wounding in the thigh, the symbolic signature of both his generative power and connection to the earth as he watches his kingdom become this wasteland, that mirrors his own unhealed trauma. I think from a Jungian perspective, the recognition would be that our collective wounding has manifested as ecological devastation, societal fragmentation, and spiritual alienation. The Grail questions that you've posited and proffered for my consciousness do not speak to me simply as philosophical inquiries. They are what you rightly highlighted Joseph Campbell's call, the calls to adventure, the invitations to the hero's journey of our time. I don't think it's a journey of conquest. It's a journey of remembrance. It's not a journey of acquisition and consumption, but of sacred return.
Returning back to our nature, returning back to nature, and letting go. It's a return to being human, humus, humility, whole and holy. And like you were saying, that what we're seeing on the outside is really a mere reflection. It's downstream. If I recall yet the other week when we were talking about this is why that no person, no party, no administration, no law, policy, etc. is going to fix that. That's all chasing symptoms and downstream when it would be best to look upstream, especially this, looking inside rather than outside. The upper world, the temporal world, has a lot of smoke and mirrors. Eternity, the soul doesn't. It speaks the truth. There's the lowercase SOUL and lowercase SELF. We are just a tiny piece of the whole, holy, the uppercase versions of those. This is a remembering, like you said.
I'm a big fan of James Hillman, and he calls it soul making, which is the idea that our purpose isn't happiness, but depth and meaning. We live in a sick, twisted culture that pathologizes sadness and markets endless distractions. I ask myself, how do I honor the necessary descent into the underworld that your Grail questions demand when our entire economic system depends on us remaining hollow men and avid consumers?
I've said this a number of times, especially in the United States, because we tend to take things to the extreme, I feel, when it comes to the West. If you want to be healthy and happy in this world today, you got to be a little bit, if not a lot, counterculture. Go at least 90 degrees, if not 180 degrees from the pack. And maybe also ask yourself, whatever it is that we're doing, start with why. The why, the how, the what. Why would be your principles, values, ethos, etc. How do you go about that? How do you live that? How do you bring those things to being? What's the desired outcome and what is the actual outcome? And ask yourself, is it working? There's so much talk and emphasis nowadays, especially in the US and probably a good portion of the rest of the world too, that happiness. I want to be happy. I want to be happy. That's all fine. I would say happiness is a beneficial side effect of deep, meaningful purpose. It's on the road, it's on the journey, and you'll experience it from time to time if you're fortunate enough, if you're blessed enough. But to have that as the centerpiece is hollow. And it's very like me centric and very like my individual lifetime centric. It has very little, if anything, to do with legacy.
This is the tension between the soul's need for depth and our culture's addiction to surface. I remember last year when I was at an airport and I was looking at people, all heads were tilted forward, scrolling, maybe not mindlessly, but it looked like that. But there wasn't that sense that they were being nourished. James Hillman wrote in The Soul's Code that the soul has a primary allegiance to images. He tells us that care of the soul requires crafters rather than science. We cannot understand the soul from natural science, from empirical and pragmatic inquiry, because the soul has different aims. It senses different dangers and grows by different means. I found there's a particular quality in the air when I step outside of these patterns. There's a thickness, a substance that wasn't there before. I remember I was in the US at the time at the Joshua Tree. People would say to me, "Why are you going to the Joshua Tree? It's just rocks and trees." I'm like, "No, it's quite a spiritual place. There's something that emanates from the land." I had a whole 3 or 4 days. I had no digital devices with me as I was walking around. Suddenly, the space between these trees seemed so alive with presence. The Japanese call this yugen, which is this profound awareness of the universe that triggers feelings I couldn't describe. They were too deep for words. After reading your post, I remember tracing back, and it was like an embodied remembrance. My body knew what my mind had forgotten, and my hands remembered how to touch the trees, how to touch the soil. My lungs remembered how to breathe deeply. My heart remembered how to break open. It was David Abraham, the philosopher, writes in The Spell of the Sensuous, the recuperation of the incarnate sensorial dimension of experience brings a reputation of the living landscape in which we are embedded. The first act of resistance, simply to be in that space, to fully feel the grief of what we've lost, to stand in the wasteland and weep and not rush to solutions, but to bear witness, because that's what it felt like. And that began to crack the spell of the hollowness I felt when I wasn't in that space.
What comes to my mind, I imagine you've had this experience, I've had this experience, and probably others. When you're with a friend, family member, loved one at their deathbed, a lot of times themselves, myself, in relationship with and in conversation with, we really get down to the really real and what's really important, because you're at that threshold, being born out of the temporal world and being born into the eternal world. You're doing a life review. A lot of times people are. And I think I've shared this with you in the past. I've had a near-death experience, a few at least. From my own personal experience, I wasn't thinking about the temporal world. I wasn't thinking about my career, my investment portfolio, my socioeconomic status, none of that. All that fades away. In the big picture for myself, and maybe a lot of people, this will resonate with them too. In the big picture, it doesn't matter. In the big picture, it doesn't matter. And I feel that perhaps the age that we're in, we can see the present state, the threshold that we're at, the precipice, and what we could be stepping into. We can be stepping into renewal or the abyss, and what's really important. During those experiences I've shared with people, that's a ceremony. It reminds me, there's this one term for the said ceremony, and one of the terms is death lodge. I imagine there's many origins, representations, because this is a timeless, inhuman thing. But the one version of this that comes to my mind is what can be found within the book by Scott Eberly, who had a career in hospice care, in his book called The Final Crossing. And within that book, there's an aspect of this ceremony called the Death Lodge. And it has these 5 questions, these 5 exchanges that one can have within this ceremony. If I remember right, it goes something like this: please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. Goodbye. Imagine if we do that now, and perhaps a number of times between now and when it becomes our time. Who do we want to be at the end of the world? Who do we want to be for ourselves within our own finite lifetime? And who do we want to be for others? The end of our species, the end of life on the biosphere. Who do we want to be for ourselves, others, and the whole tapestry of life and the sacred?
Yeah, I totally resonate with the near-death experience. That's a completely different dynamic. You also write that we're not just witnessing collapse, We're living inside of forgetting. That reminded me of what the Greeks called lethe, the river of forgetting souls who cross before rebirth. Do you see that we're not experiencing just environmental collapse or civilizational collapse, but more of a collective soul amnesia? If that's the case, what have we forgotten that is most essential to remember? In that near-death experience I had, I remembered I'm actually a soul. It wasn't this stuff that mattered. It wasn't even my brain. Everything was telepathic. There was a sense of remembering. I feel there is this collective soul amnesia. So what have we forgotten that is most essential for us to remember?
I would say we're not the center of the universe. Much of the news is human centric, right? Politics is very human centric. And yeah, we live on a biosphere, a living sphere. And one way they describe humans is that we're a superorganism. We're a walking bacterial colony, and that there's more microorganisms to us than actual human cells. The same when it comes to the whole of the biosphere. It's this intricate, interwoven, interdependent web. We are just one teeny fiber within one teeny strand within that web. Then we can zoom out further and use that lens when it comes to the universe, when it comes to the cosmos. For me, I would say it's very humbling. You can't help but stand in awe and wonder and reverence. Every moment, every breath is a ceremony, is a sacrament. Every time you step upon the earth, it's like you're kissing the earth. So if that was to happen to a critical mass in the whole of humanity, that's alchemy. That's transformation. All the woes, all the sorrows, as we see them being played out on our devices, we're being bombarded with as far as all the happenings. I guess what we've forgotten, as Joseph Campbell said something along the lines, eternity is now. I think this is something from the Bible that they found post World War II, the Gospel of Thomas. I'm paraphrasing that the kingdom of heaven is upon the land, but men do not see it. Heaven is here and now. The Garden of Eden is here and now. We were talking about last week that we're in nature and nature is in us. We're in heaven and heaven's in us. Garden of Eden is in us and we're in the garden. As Joseph Campbell has said, within mythology, all the gods, all the heavens and all the hells are within you. It's both and. So having this awareness, choose. Do you want a little bit more heaven or a little bit more hell? And so I guess in this case, heaven and hell's between our ears. It's so simple, it's difficult.
As you were speaking, it reminded me of a dream I had some time ago. And this relates to what have we forgotten? In the dream, it was during a winter solstice. I was underwater. I remember I was searching for something I'd lost, but I couldn't remember what it was. When I surfaced, I was in a completely different environment. I was in this cathedral of what seemed to be like redwoods. And this old woman appeared in the dream. And she said to me, "You're the thing you've been looking for." I thought, is this forgetting that we're speaking of palpable in our collective dreamscape? We move through shopping malls like sleepwalkers. We build endless highways as if we're in this trance. We've forgotten not just our connection to the more than human world, but we are the more than human world expressing itself through human form. There's a great author, Thomas Berry. He's got a book called The Great Forgetting. I think the book's called The Dream of the Earth, where he writes about our culture's amnesia regarding our place in the cosmos. We're talking only to ourselves. We're not talking to the rivers. We're not listening to the wind and the stars. We've broken the great conversation. And by breaking that conversation, we have shattered the universe. I'm struck by how this forgetting manifests in our language. We no longer speak of the sun rising. We talk of sunrise as if it was an event separate from us, rather than a relationship we participate in. I was looking up Indigenous languages because, as I understand it, they encode this relationship differently. So I'm just looking at my notes here. One of the things they wrote, they actually encode their relationship differently, not as the river, but this river being with whom we share the valley. What I hear beneath the words is that remembrance isn't cognitive, it's cellular. It lives in the body, it lives in the breath. It's in the moments when the veil thins and there's a recognition that we are walking conversations between earth and sky. Is there not the realization, there is in me, like when I was at the Joshua Tree or any of those beautiful landscapes on the West Coast, the realization is that God is everywhere and extraordinary is waiting quietly beneath the skin of all that is ordinary. And I wonder if the Grail legend centers on a wounded king whose unhealed trauma becomes the land's devastation. From a Jungian perspective, this suggests to me this outer ecological crisis reflects an inner wound. The question I asked myself was, what wound do I carry that seeks to remake the world in its image? You know, what collective wound do I believe drives our civilization's destructive patterns? There's something almost unbearable in this recognition.
One thing that comes to my mind, perhaps, is this fight, this quest against entropy, in that we've walled ourselves away in an attempt from entropy. So, what is it? The paradisa in Persian, or maybe Greek, I forget, one of the two, translates to walled garden. So we've taken ourselves out of that garden in an attempt to escape entropy, but then we walled ourselves off altogether now. One of the things that came to my mind with what you're just sharing is that we are just one case of the earth, or a walking aspect of the earth made conscious. You could also say that about us in regards to the stars, because that's another aspect within one of the parts that I had written about, is that we're all star stuff, going back to Carl Sagan. And then when I say we, that's just not humans. It's everything upon the biosphere. Everything within the universe came by way of stellar nucleosynthesis. The elements are only possible through the death of an exploding star. So in that respects, we're all related. All the elements that we are made of was at one point was in the womb of a dying star. If people really took that on, alchemy is just to change the view, to change our hearts once again, and not just to be moving through life like this. And to borrow from Jonathan Pajot, he talks about the zombie zeitgeist and how many of us have, if not in many ways, enlivened and embodied that. He goes on saying that zombies are us decayed.
I was watching a YouTube video where they built one of these data centers in America. It was a Facebook or Instagram data center, huge thing. They cleared so many trees. There was a couple who'd lived there for 40 or 50 years, and they lived like hop, skip, and a jump away from this data center. It's affected the whole ecology. This drive to, and I'm not anti-technology at all, but where is the reverence? We have these clear-cut forests, these acidifying oceans. They're not separate from us. They're expressions of our inner landscape. When I listen to this couple who'd been there all their lives, I feel the wound in my body. I feel the tightness in my chest. I feel the holding in the throat. Carl Jung, in his book, he wrote in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections that the psyche and the world are not separate. They are complementary aspects of the same thing. It's like the gods have become diseases because that conversation has been broken. It creates grief. I'm trying to think of the psychologist, Francis Weller, who calls it the fifth gate of grief. That's the ancestral grief we carry. Those of us with European ancestry carry the wounds of being severed from our own indigenous knowing. Many of us ascend from people who were themselves colonized, who lost their connection to place and ceremony and meaning, who then carried that wound across oceans. So what happens when a species forgets it belongs to the earth? We become like cells that no longer recognize the body they belong to and begin to multiply without regard for the whole. What is this medical term called? It's called cancer. But I also see wounds as initiation. In traditional cultures, the wounded healer is the one who has made the descent into their own suffering and emerged carrying medicine for the community. Maybe our collective wound is also the birthplace of our medicine if we have the courage to tend it rather than flee from it.
It's a call to adventure, stepping from the known into the unknown, from the temporal world into the underworld, and coming back. It's the separation, initiation, and return. It's a rite of passage, like you were saying. It reminds me from the Native American cultures here, but I imagine this might be also universal. Indigenous people throughout the earth, but something along the lines of this is that in order to receive from Great Spirit, you have to also give something to Great Spirit. So you're giving a sacrament, you're performing a ritual. There's a mental, emotional, physical, spiritual aspect you're giving. It reminds me of the holistic model that many people are familiar of when they hear mind, body, and spirit, right? But in a lot of indigenous cultures, they take that a step further. So it's not just mind, body, spirit, it's also land, tribe, and ancestors. Going back to the Native people in this context here, what I'm bringing up here is the recognition that you and the land are one. You've mentioned this a number of times that what we're seeing in the outside world is really downstream and a reflection of upstream of the inner world, the inner decay, the inner landscape. What we're doing to ourselves, we're doing to the earth, and vice versa. It's multi-directional. Killing the bird, killing the song, killing ourselves. It's multi-directional.
Going back to your invocation of Daniel Quinn's Ishmael, brings up for me the distinction between takers and leavers, those who believe they own the world, as distinct from those who belong to it. Almost everyone is living in an industrial society and they are entangled in the taker systems. The question that I was asking myself is, how do we begin the transformation without falling into either despair or naive utopianism?
Utopia in the Greek means no place, doesn't exist.
Something else resonated with me about your writing was the navigation between the totalizing narratives of either salvation or doom. I often find myself oscillating between moments of profound hope because I encounter people who are living differently and sometimes crushing despair, especially when I see the ancillary nonsense that is broadcasted with bombast from the rooftops. Rebecca Solnit captures this tension beautifully in her book, Hope in the Dark, where she writes, hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. Hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures and the grinding down of the poor and marginal.
It makes sense to me. You're doing the best that you can in each moment with what is possible for yourself, and you're planting seeds. It's one breath, it's one moment at a time. What we're facing now began some time ago. This is a meta crisis and there's a convergence. The initial inertia might have taken place the moment we climbed down from the trees. It's been going on for quite some time. It didn't happen overnight, right? It's not going to go away overnight. This is bigger than any one person. This is bigger than any one lifetime. This is bigger than any one generation. There's a snowball, this avalanche that has building up for some time. I would say it's at the point to where it's like glaringly evident, if people have eyes in any sense, I would say at least. But it's been going on for quite some time. None of us bear that weight on our shoulders alone. It's not our role either. It's a recognition of our humanness, to be human, and I guess if anything, just choose differently and do the best that you can. This isn't a matter of good, bad, wrong, or original sin. Sin in Aramaic, if I recall, means something along the lines of you missed the mark, try again. Unripened fruit, not ready, try again.
I agree with you. The destruction of our world has been on the way for quite a while. It's the fact some of us are beginning to wake up from a millennia long sleep to a whole new relationship to our world, to ourselves, and to each other. For me, there's something humbling about this. And the humbleness I feel is in the recognition that none of us stands outside the systems that we may critique. Each meal, each interaction, each moment of attention becomes a choice point, like this tiny revolution in consciousness, not to fix the world, but to remember our place within it. We're called to change its story.
Joseph Campbell said something along the lines that to the point we do this for ourselves, we then in turn help the world. A vital person helps to vitalize. You're not going on a quest to save the world, perhaps to save your soul, to become whole and holy, to be a human being serving humanity, serving the sacred rather than the machine.
There was also a line in your piece, I can't remember exactly word for word, but I remembered thinking, oh, this challenges the messianic impulses that drive environmental activism. The question here is, could our very desire to save the planet be another expression of the domination mindset that created the crisis?
It could be a slippery slope.
Right?
And so a lot of times anger tends to build momentum and move people. And not to say there is a time and a place for that, but that alone is corrosive and cancerous, like you were mentioning earlier. It divides, it doesn't unify. It's not going towards holism. It's either or thinking, more of the left brain hemisphere. With fear, trauma, anger, you're not coming from a place of integration. You haven't had a balance and taking back of projections and the enlivening, the embodying of both ends, right? The feminine, the masculine, the anima and the animus. It's very reactionary anger. We're seeing this, unfortunately, within a lot of the actions of activists nowadays. Let's just say they succeed in their goals. Often there's a vacuum left in place. Many times, what is put in place of that vacuum isn't always the best. Sometimes it's even worse. The old saying, once again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. If we want a better and perhaps best outcome, we need time to pause, to contemplate, to reflect. That requires more wisdom. In this age of information, there's so much that we're being bombarded with, and not all of it is good quality, accurate information. There's a lot of misinformation. And so we have a lot of this stuff that we fill ourselves with. A lot of times we have not nearly as much of the knowledge, the hands-on lived experience with the information. We don't give ourselves time for it to take root and test it, the test of time and seasons, and to build wisdom. We're very quick, we're very reactionary. We're not in an age of wise elders. It's almost, if not in many ways, a mental, emotional, spiritual dark age. And that people who have ideas, because there's so much information that they're being bombarded with, the ideas have them more so than them having the ideas. To borrow from Carl Jung, he says people don't have ideas, ideas have them. So it's somewhat of a possession that is occurring. And in some cases, unfortunately, it's a demonic possession because it's bringing out the shadow side of people's psyche and the dark archetypes. It's more destructive of what Carl Jung saw in his assessment of pre-World War II Nazi Germany, the archetype, that the mythos being enacted and embodied in Nazi Germany at the time, Wotan, also known as Odin, the archetype of chaos. I feel that archetype is still alive today.
You made me think about Indigenous wisdom traditions. They emphasize participation as distinct from intervention. Therefore, the human role is not to direct nature, but to participate skillfully in its unfolding, to be in right relationship. There was a tribe called the Anishinaabe from the Great Lakes region of North America. They have a beautiful word, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Meno Bimad, Minobimaadiziwin. It translates roughly as the good life. What's amazing about that is how they're in right relationship and the fact it encompasses the understanding that my good life cannot come at the expense of others' good lives, human or more than human. This goes back to Martin Buber, the philosopher, who expressed in I and thou when two people relate to each other authentically and humanely. And God is the electricity that surges between them. So maybe this doesn't apply between humans, but between humans and the more than human world when we relate, not as I, it, but as I, thou. So I see it in what you wrote. There was a profound invitation to respond to it with profound humility, to recognize that I don't need to bear the burden of saving the earth. She doesn't need saving. She's been through 5 mass extinctions. So she will continue long after we've gone. The question is, can I choose to remember how to live in ways that allow me to remain as a participant in her story, in her inner arrangement, like those Indigenous people?
To live within the song.
To
I
live
guess
within the song, exactly.
within the harmony, to be in accord and not discord, to remember, to respect the humus part of ourselves, the earth. And it's interesting because a lot of times it's been said when someone has passed from dust to dust, you're going back to the soil. You're going back from where you emerged. And there's no separation. You emerged doesn't mean you were ever separate. It's once again, it's a remembering. It's a remembering.
You touched on this last week, but in your piece, you were writing about re-enchantment, that re-enchantment is not escapism, it's a sacred return. This challenges both the materialist dismissal of spirituality and the spiritual bypass that ignores material conditions. I ask myself, how do we cultivate authentic re-enchantment that doesn't evolve into new age consumerism or apocalyptic fatalism? How do we do that? I think part of how we do that is to start to be in right relationship and to reclaim enchantment, not as a fantasy, but as a perception, seeing through rather than just seeing beyond. The Celtic concept of thin places where the boundary between worlds becomes permeable. But it's not escape for me, it's deepening.
I would say, yeah, it's changing your lens, changing your view, changing your awareness and respect, reverence, acknowledgement, etc. And I think you brought up a number of times today something along the lines when it comes to thinking. And one figure in particular when it comes to this is Rene Descartes. And the famous idea of his is that I think, therefore I am, which is myopic because thinking is a later aspect of sensing. Thinking has more to do with the frontal, the executive centers of our brain. But if we look at the midbrain and the brain stem, this is how it works for the nervous system and brain. It's a bottom up from the back to the mid to the front. And so the prefrontal cortex, the executive centers, is only as good as the ones preceding it. If someone doesn't feel safe, the vital life-preserving aspects aren't stable, then I'm going to be limited here. The foundation is I sense, therefore I am. I feel, therefore I am. To sense and feel one's inner world in relationship with the outer world, in that we're in the world and the world's in us, the sacred, the tapestry of life.
There is that permeable place, that thin veil that the Celts talk about. I remember some time ago, I was sitting by a river for quite some time, probably an hour or so. Suddenly, the quality of my attention shifted. It wasn't something new that appeared or manifested itself, but my perception opened up. It was like the living intelligence of the water, the communication between plants, the way the whole scene was in constant conversation with itself. nothing had changed except my capacity to perceive relationship. It's that shift from being busy and rushing around, foot on the gas, your checklists, and when you stop and commune with nature. I don't mean that in a hippy dippy turn on, tune out kind of way. I mean, you step into the halls of perception, something else comes, as you were describing so beautifully, from the bottom up. It's not the prefrontal cortex that has that perception. That might be the translation with words, but something else comes through.
Imagine seeing the world for the first time, seeing, feeling, smelling, just being in the world for the first time. It reminds me of the sense of what a child has, of awe and wonder, and perhaps even magic. I just pulled up something because this has been coming up a number of times during today's talk with you and I. Joseph Campbell, the goal of life, for instance. One of the things he said is that the goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with nature.
That's the approach. In that scenario that I described and in what you just read out, I wasn't there to extract data, but unbeknownst to me, to enter into a dialogue with the phenomena that could speak back to me.
Something magical is occurring. It reminds me of we're in the church, we're in the cathedral. If we were to open our eyes and really be and sit with it, it doesn't have to be any one particular place. It's now. And also it's in between, it's within, and it's also within you. It reminds me of the Sioux medicine man, Black Elk. Is one view when it comes to this, and I'm paraphrasing, something was said along the lines that the center of the universe is everywhere and nowhere. So the center is within you, within me, in between, and everywhere else. We could also use sacred as well as the universe, God, love. This is beyond words, beyond the prefrontal cortex executive centers, right? This is pre-human. This is pre-language. This is pre-civilization.
You reminded me of a piece in Cosmos and Psyche. Richard Tarnas wrote that the human mind is not merely affected by the world, but affects the world through its participation in the creative unfolding of reality. Astrologically, when Neptune transits significant points in our chart, we are invited into a more permeable state of consciousness that allows for enchantment. What strikes me about re-enchantment, as per your post, is that it doesn't require belief so much as attention. It's less about adding something new than removing the filters that prevent us from experiencing what's already here.
To pull back the veil. The veil of illusion, the veil of otherness, the veil of it rather than thou. This goes on. The illusion of this temporal upper world. What we have in large part is just bread and circuses. We have spectacles, amusements, and those are distractions. They pull us away from the sacred within, the sacred in between, the sacred within you. What are we doing nowadays, especially in the US and other parts of the world? We're othering people. We're dehumanizing ourselves. We're dehumanizing others. It's anti-life. It's anti-human. In some cases, some of these people, if not all of these people who are participating in what I'm describing here, are thinking that this is a solution, that they're going to make it better. No, we're actually doing the opposite. It reminds me of Einstein. If we're using the same line of thinking in addressing it, that's the definition of insanity. You can't address the problem, if anything, perhaps similar way of thinking that helped create that problem in the first place. That's left thinking.
Therefore, does authentic re-enchantment have a dual movement to it? Does it then have the courage to face what's dying and also the willingness to notice what's continuing to sing? Not as an escape from reality, but as a descent into its depths. I was getting this from the Grail Questions you posited and proffered for our consciousness. You ask the Grail Questions about the place of the feminine in our world, and many eco-feminists have connected our ecological crisis to the suppression of feminine wisdom and values. So, what aspects of the feminine principle are most critically absent from our collective consciousness, and how might we restore and help heal the wasteland?
One of a number of things that come to my mind is that feminine, as well as the masculine, is both figurative and literal. And so for some people, they're just looking at one half of the species. It's feminine, it's masculine, rather than the both parts within that make up the whole. And so going back to the depths, the unconscious, the soul, the anima, and the animus, it's not adversarial. It's the recognition, the respect, the reverence of the whole, the integration and the individuation. It's the balance. It's not one or the other, it's both. And we don't want too much of one over the other. We want balance. There's a time and a place for a more masculine way of being or a more feminine way of being a little bit more decisive and assertive. There's context, there's nuance. A lot of what mapping out here when it comes to that is missing, is skipped over.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about the ancient Greek temples, especially the Temple of Delphi, where the stone marked what they believed to be the navel of the world, the place of connection between worlds. And this feminine image of the world having a navel, a place of former connection and nurture and nourishment, feels significant in light of what you were describing. In depth psychology, the feminine principle represents not just gender, but a mode of consciousness characterized by receptivity, containment, and relation. There was a piece she wrote in The Pregnant Virgin that matter and spirit were never separate. That is an illusion of the materialistic mind. This disconnection from the feminine reflects what Jung calls our loss of the soul, a severance from the anima mundi, the soul of the world.
It's a separation from ourselves, each other, the collective unconscious, and the world, like you said, and then that of the cosmos. So I feel like for many nowadays, when it comes to the feminine side of us humans, it's a little myopic and adversarial. We're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I notice there seems to be a lot of anger too. There seems to be a lot of trauma. So until we integrate and heal our inner wounds and balance, we take back our affections, then it's not helping in the big picture. So the hurt of one is the hurt of all. Hurt people hurt people. So if one has been hurt, that's one half of the relationship. But then compassion found within the Grail is also recognizing the hurt in the other as well. There's a whole, there's a both and relationship here. It's just not one-sided. If we just focus on the one half and not consider the whole, we're only going to address a fraction of the whole once again.
I'm sitting here with the recognition that our cultural severance from the feminine isn't only philosophical, it actually lives in our bodies. In the way we've been taught to override our body signals in service to productivity, in how we've learned to distrust intuition, emotion, the knowing that comes through feeling rather than analysis. If I put my evolutionary astrology hat on and look through that lens, we are witnessing the culmination of a Capricornian epoch, which was dominated by hierarchical structures, patriarchal systems, and the emphasis on achievement over relationship. Stephen Forrest notes in his book, The Book of Neptune, the root meaning of the word hierarchy is sacred ruler, but there's nothing sacred about our modern hierarchies. They're machines for the production of alienation. So there's this long exile, I feel, of the feminine from many of our traditions and our culture that's had devastating consequences. The loss of soul is ultimately the loss of relationship with nature, with each other, with the imaginal realm, the invisible realm. There's a quality of feminine wisdom that reveals itself in thresholds, not as a medical event, but it's like a sacred passage. The wisdom of being a threshold guardian feels profoundly absent in a culture that treats both birth and death as problems to solve rather than mysteries to enter.
One aspect of this age, the age of crisis, the meta crisis, I mentioned it earlier. It was our attempt to avert entropy. So when it comes to the feminine and its complaints of the masculine, or the misogynistic, oppressive patriarchy, for instance, I would say fit under that umbrella of the attempt to avert entropy. And rather than it just stopping with the patriarchy, we're looking at modern civilization. I would replace the word patriarchy with civilization, and then with the subtitle descriptor of the attempt to avert entropy.
What I'm hearing from you is a reclamation of the feminine isn't about replacing one's hierarchy with another, but it's the restoration of balance, the sacred marriage of masculine and feminine principles that exist within each one of us, regardless of gender. So it's not a battle between forces, it's actually a dance. Civilization is a dance.
If you smash the patriarchy, and then if you trace back patriarchy throughout the ages, we're going to find ourselves back being nomadic hunter gatherers, and the earth and our experience on the earth. Let's just say we're able to flip a switch or snap our fingers and imagine our ability to do, and we're going back through all the phases, all the ages prior to civilization, prior to patriarchy. Then we're going to be cat food and subject to nature, red in tooth and claw. I imagine that probably a good majority of us, if we were to have our choice and vote and say, okay, I'm up for that, we're probably not going to have too many takers. So that's not practical, that's not realistic. So, how do we balance the two worlds? You see what I'm saying?
These are big questions, and they are deep contemplations that we need to be steeped in and to sort and sift and look for the balance, look for the harmony that could come about from the establishment of this sacred container.
I think sacred is a big keystone here, recognizing the sacred within you, the sacred within me, the sacred in between. We're in the sacred and the sacred is within us, with that sense of being and that sense of being with. That's alchemy once again. As far as these labels and the othering that is very commonplace today, for me at least, that dissolves, that goes away, because that's illusion, and that's more left brain, and that's more upper world. It reminds me of one of the poems from Rumi: beyond the world of ideas and worlds, there's a field, and I'll meet you there. You're probably more familiar. That rings a bell, though.
Yeah. The other thing that struck me about your piece, I think it was in the conclusion, but you wrote something like, you will not be remembered for what you had, but for what you carried. I thought, wow, that evokes for me the Greek concept of kleos. And that's the glory that comes through story rather than possessions. Legacy today is measured in wealth or achievement. I wrote down what would it mean to be remembered for what we carried? And then what emerged was this profound reorientation from accumulation to transmission. And I'm reminded of the saying that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. What you're pointing to goes even deeper, that we ourselves are something being carried, something passing through. In James Hillman's book, The Soul's Code, he calls it the acorn theory, the idea that each one of us carries a unique diamond or calling. And he writes that you are born with a character, it is given a gift, as the old stories say, from the guardians upon your birth. What we carry in this sense is not something acquired, but something entrusted to us. It's a particular quality of being that seeks expression through our lives. And that quality carries a sacredness that arises when we recognize ourselves not as owners, but as carriers.
Stewards, gardeners within the garden. The theme today that you and I are having is the minority. I talk with people, and a lot of times, especially if they have children, the emphasis of one or both parents often is deeply rooted within the upper world, within the temporal realm, within the material realm, and providing the children with all the wants and needs. And a lot of times, what I'm hearing as far as what's being provided when it comes to needs really isn't a need. It reminds me of the Lorax, and the Lorax talked about needs. If I remember right, chopping down the forest in order to make all these needs, Thneads. So I myself is a little challenged when I talk with these people and hear some of the things. Everyone's going to do what they're going to do, to each their own, as they say. But if it was me, I would rather teach my children how to be within themselves, within the world, with each other, and within the whole tapestry and symphony of life, and teach them how to serve, respect, honor the sacred, and also gratitude and how to suffer well. Because life isn't always about feels and vibes. There's a time and a place for that. I would say a tiny fraction, if any, and sacrifice.
This is why the initial opening of the conversation was about dying, that we have to die to certain things. You have to let things die. I was really intrigued by what you're a carrier of. I thought to myself, if I woke up each morning, I wonder how my life would change if I asked myself a few questions. Number one, what am I carrying today? What has been entrusted to me? What wants to move through me into the world? This shift from protagonist to participant and from consumer to steward totally shifts my perception. That's a great exercise I gleaned from your post by asking yourself those questions first thing in the morning and not attaching any outcome to it, but to put it out there.
I did mention Scott Eberly a few minutes ago in the book Final Crossing. The subtitle is Learning How to Die in Order to Live. I think you just said something along those lines about letting something die, learning how to die in order to live. Because here's the thing, if we keep on with the present mythos of the day, if we keep on enlivening and embodying what we could possibly allow to die in order to restore, to re-enchant, if we don't, that is going to kill us. And it might not just stop with us.
It already is.
When it comes to mass extinction, in most cases, it's a process.
Water doesn't go from cold to hot, it goes by degree.
We're in that process right now. Can we navigate the Titanic to avoid the iceberg? Do we have enough time? I don't know. That's the $100,000 question. But I would say, if anything, if we start to see the iceberg, let's start navigating.
This has been a great conversation, and I would invite anyone listening to this to sit with these Grail questions, not as puzzles to solve, but invitations to live differently. Corey, you showed us the Grail is not something to be found at the end of a quest, but it's a way of moving through the world with reverence, intention, and the courage to ask what truly ails us. Where can people find your Substack post?
It's Embodied Grail Humble Wasteland. And to note to you and the audience, at this time, May 9th, 10:30 Pacific time, I'm still probably going to tweak it a bit because some other things have come to mind since the initial edition. It's a living document, living questions, kind of like what you were just mentioning. Thank you, Peter.
You're most welcome. I love exploring these things with you. We don't have all the answers, but it's the exploration that's important, and for us to put it out there and see what arises. I never really know, but thank you so much for writing that article. It sparked a lot of things in me, a lot of questions and some insights. It's like a loom where you start weaving all these different strands together and it leads to references. It's a really interesting exploration. I trust people will have the perception to be in right relationship that is about exploration as distinct from exploitation.
And you just brought up something in particular to the introduction piece. If you look at the present, and if you look at the quotes within the introduction, they're about 100 years apart from then to today. What's happening now has been happening. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. The falcon's us, And the falconer is the sacred. When we're not listening, things will fall apart. The center cannot hold. That was 1919. Fast forward to today. If we pay attention and do something different, because a lot of times the whispers of the soul, the pains of the body, the pains of the soul are to get us to slow down, I would say, pay attention and do something different. Looking today, looking back then, post World War One, the same, but different. Thank you, Peter.
And we'll hook up and see what the next iteration is, whatever seems to surface.
I look forward to it.